Continuing on with our treatment of Tavistock, I think it'll be a short one today. But this issue is just tremendous. There's quite a long article that goes into quite a bit of historical detail on the Nazi. What are the Nazi origins of MK Ultra and mind control? Not that Nazi origins are the only origins, but this is really a treasure trove here. Executive Intelligence Review, October 6, 1989. And we have this wonderful cover, kinds of things that are going on. U.S. dope lobby escalates against Barco. I think that's Colombia. World outcry over attempt on LaRouche in jail. So LaRouche, the genius, the polymath, a man who was both incredibly intellectually gifted and also really in the middle of things and with access to high levels of power and really knew what he was talking about. I can't think of another figure in contemporary times who equals him in both of these respects, and that's why one reason I think we should pay attention, we should listen, we should go back and look through these archives. And Schiller Institute rallies defense of Lebanon, but the cover, the big article here, how Nazi doctors created the counterculture in America, the Aquarian conspiracy so-called, and then this picture of this hippie milieu that looks very familiar to me because I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this takes me back just to look at it. I don't know, could be anywhere, could be Massachusetts, but you get the picture. At any rate, I'm a little tired of all this Nazi stuff. Incredible how low level that's become. Any reference and any cheap, superficial way to connect people to this phenomenon that really people don't understand. And no awareness, for instance, of the Nazi International or the very real Nazi origins of so much of what people consider modern liberal society. No appreciation, no awareness. So that's quite a long article. I think we'll do this short one today. It's a two-parter, I think. 30 years of menticide. Menticide being a very important component of the empire. If you can destroy people's minds, you can control them more effectively. You can get them to give up on thinking for themselves or developing themselves, and you can get them to do any number of incredibly stupid things. So, interesting. Where's the writer here? Who's the writer? Okay, well, maybe in part two we'll give the author here. 30 years of menticide, killing of the mind, which is done through advertising, vaccines, so-called education, destructive programs, trauma, as we've been seeing a lot of that, destroying people's minds. So, from MK Ultra brainwashing to the American Family Foundation. In 1956, a young Air Force major named Dr. Louis Jolyon West published an article in the American Journal of Psychiatry with the unambiguous title, Brainwashing. Dr. West's credentials in that burgeoning field were impressive. As one of the experimental researchers at the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, he was part of a team of psychiatrists carrying out experiments with LSD-25 and other drugs under the patronage of the CIA. His most recent claim to fame has been his killing of an elephant with a massive dose of LSD, a feat he reportedly documented with photographs that he carried around with him. I mean, this is the level of person we're talking about. We're talking about the scum of the earth, the absolute most despicable sickos out there. That's disgusting. The nature of West's activities back then was known to only a handful of people in the most secret quarters of the U.S. and British governments. For most of his colleagues, West was a medical doctor working in Oklahoma City at the Veterans Administration Hospital and holding consulting positions with the University of Oklahoma and the city government of Oklahoma City. Only 20 years later, when congressional investigators discovered the existence of MKUltra and other mind control projects, would West's actual covert career be revealed? Or covert, I think they said back in the day, covert, because it's from the word cover. It's not something, it's covert, guys. I know that sounds old-fashioned, but... and even then, the story would be far from complete. Today, Jolly West is as involved as ever in the covert side of mind control. At about the same time that Dr. West was stalking elephants in the jungles of Oklahoma, Rabbi Morris Davis was finishing up a 5-year stay in Lexington, Kentucky, where, in addition to running a Reformed Jewish congregation, he was a chaplain with the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital for Drug Addicts. Yeah, that's another thing they get you with. The United States now, a drug problem 3 times higher than the next competitor in that field. And we can see the effects as we go into any number of American cities and look at what's become of them. We see zombification on a mass scale, on a scale that even back in 1989, nobody could have imagined how bad it would get. And a lot of that is, I think, being, obviously, it's been facilitated by this kind of activity. I don't believe for a second that the drug epidemic in the United States is accidental. Or that it's due to neglect or too much freedom. No, I'm sure it's been piped in there, it's been designed, and it is not only menticide, but it is genocide. The Addiction Research Center, ARC, at Lexington, run by Dr. Harris Isbell, was at the time one of the main recipients of covert MKUltra funds to carry out large-scale brainwashing and mind control experiments on the captive population. Through his chaplain's post at the facility, chaplains, God. That's how they conduited all of this end-times Christianity from British intelligence into the U.S. military through these chaplaincies that were being run at higher levels by British intelligence operatives. Through his chaplain's post at the facility, Davis was reportedly a key player in the MKUltra work that went on at Lexington. According to one of Dr. Isbell's staff doctors, Sherman Kiefer, Davis was a bridge between the community and the hospital wards where, quote-unquote, patients, victims, were treated to heavy doses of drugs interspersed with electroshock and induced sleep. Quote, Rabbi Davis, as a chaplain, functioned as a representative of the outside world, projecting the outside world as warm and caring. One of the therapeutic approaches taken by the ARC toward their patients was the encouragement of participation in cults. In 1956, Davis was moving on to bigger and better things, a post as chief rabbi at the Indianapolis Hebrew congregation, the largest Reform synagogue in the state. His work as a community-based patron of mind-bending cults would continue to grow. Indianapolis is a city whose social welfare and community health structure is dominated by the Eli Lilly Corporation, which at the time was a key element of the secret MK Ultra work, providing LSD to the CIA out of its pharmaceutical labs. Davis immediately became a fixture of the ecumenical activist community there, becoming an intimate collaborator in the Episcopal Bishop Paul Moore. Moore would later move on to the Episcopal Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, where he would emerge as a major patron of the New Age movement, hosting such outfits as the Lucis Trust, Gaia, and the Temple of Understanding. CEIR, February 10, 1989, the Lucis Trust. Satanism and the New World Order, I think we'll get into that too. Because there's so much distortion of these things on YouTube and of what these mean and where they come from, and everyone tries to boil it down to exciting clickbait titles and oversimplified theories, and it gets a lot of attention, and people... it really stokes hysteria in the alt community. But I'm telling you, this is what you have to do. You have to go back to these articles, and you have to go back to the beginning of it all. And you don't trust these people today who have a very, very slick presence and a lot of clickbait energy, right? So it's right there in front of you. It's very easy to find. You go to Executive Intelligence Review. Download this issue right here. Study it. Okay. Jonestown and other projects. One of the most infamous projects on which Davis and Moore teamed up during their stay in Indianapolis was the sponsorship of the career of cult leader Reverend Jim Jones and his People's Temple. Not only did Davis personally intercede with the city government to have Jones installed on the city's Public Housing Commission, Davis also got Jones his first church building. Dr. West and Rabbi Davis never abandoned their secret MK Ultra work. By the mid-1970s, their paths crossed as both men became fixtures in a nationwide network ostensibly committed to helping families rescue their children who had been recruited into religious cults. If the 1950s was the decade in which brainwashing was the buzzword in the secret backrooms of the Anglo-American intelligence community, the 1970s was the decade in which brainwashing became a subject of near soap opera fascination among the general public. Between the 1974 kidnapping and brainwashing of heiress Patty Hearst, I remember this very clearly, by the terrorist Symbionese Liberation Army, and the 1978 mass suicides of the People's Temple in Jonestown, Guyana, parents all over America were worrying whether their son or daughter would be next. In the immediate aftermath of Jonestown, the very medical experimenters, psychiatric shock troops, those psychiatrists coming kind of with ties to Tavistock, and community mental health operators who had crafted the fine art of brainwashing in the 1950s and had fathered the counterculture and the proliferation of irrationalist cults in the 1960s, surfaced a nationwide series of organizations bearing such alluring titles as the American Family Foundation, the Cult Awareness Network, Citizens Engaged in Reuniting Families, and the International Foundation for Individual Freedom. It appears that the same secret government funding conduits that had been used to fuel the MK Ultra efforts were back at it again, funding the army of erstwhile anti-cult, quote-unquote, anti-cult networks. If that's confusing to you, just take a moment, and it's very important to get that. Back in the mid-1950s, an Air Force lieutenant colonel named James Monroe, on loan to the CIA, had set up a society for the study of human ecology in New York City as the principal money conduit for the scores of hospital and university-based drug experiments conducted under MKUltra. By the 1970s, the money laundering infrastructure had been built up around a handful of tax-exempt philanthropic family foundations. When AFF got off the ground in 1979, its principal patrons were the small New York City-based Bodman Foundation and the Schiafe, I don't know how Americans would say that, Schiafe? That's new to me. Scaife? I'm thinking it's Italian. I have to look it up. Scaife, probably Scaife. I've been studying Italian, so. By the early 1980s, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, longtime sponsors of Rabbi Davis, ADL, remember, coming out of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, had gotten into the act as well. The Swig Foundation of San Francisco, run by ADL National Committeeman Marvis Swig, joined the elite list of AFF contributors. The Bodman Foundation counted among its small list of recipients some of the key centers of New Age and occult activity, including the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, of Bishop Paul Moore, the Temple of Understanding, and the Henry Street Settlement House. Leo Chern's International Rescue Committee, a long-standing covert arm of the social democratic wing of the CIA, also enjoyed Bodman's largesse. The Scaife, right, it's got to be Scaife, right? The Scaife Foundation, run by Richard Mellon Scaife, is another well-known covert conduit of special funds linked to the Project Democracy apparatus. During the heyday of MKUltra, another heir of the Mellon family fortune, Billy Mellon Hitchcock, had been a major funder of LSD experimentation and manufacturing. License to kidnap. In the post-Jonestown climate, the American Family Foundation, with Jolly West on its board of directors and the Cult Awareness Network linked to Rabbi Davis, became clearinghouses for a nationwide network of kidnappers targeting members of what are, in some cases, genuinely dangerous cults for kidnappings and brainwashing. The fact that these dangerous cults, such as the Unification Church, Scientology, and EST, were all outgrowths of MKUltra and related covert projects, underscores the point that the anti-cult networks were a continuation of the very same experiments. AFF and CAN adopted the euphemistic term deprogramming, very clever, very sly, very slimy, to describe their activities. Ironically, the term deprogramming likely derives from one of the most primitive and brutal form of brainwashing developed under the MKUltra funding umbrella, depatterning. Developed at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada by Dr. Ewan Cameron, an intimate collaborator of Tavistock Institute brainwashers Dr. John Rawlings Rees and Dr. William Sargent, depatterning initially involved the use of drugs, sleep therapy, electroconvulsive shock treatments, and sensory deprivation torture to break patients of their behavioral patterns and beliefs. Cameron's efforts were so heavy-handed and so incompetent that the CIA wound up paying out millions of dollars to victims of his depatterning lab to cover up the full horror story, which you can see on, you can find on YouTube television exposés of this very tragic episode here. it was all out in the open. And back in the 80s, you could turn on the TV and learn about it. Today, oh my God, no, it's conspiracy theory. People have regressed to such an extraordinary degree. I never would have dreamed it would be possible. Anyway, other more reasonable brainwashers like Sargent argued in books bearing titles as Battle for the Mind and The Mind Possessed that the same results could be achieved by replicating the process of religious conversions without having to get into the kinds of heavy drug and electroshock techniques that have only limited applications in an institutional setting. So here's a link, as I've been saying, and sometimes I get into little skirmishes with people online when I talk about religion as being, a psychological phenomenon that I think the oligarchy has figured out for thousands of years. You could tap into this, and you could effectively control people that way, and that they're re-tapping into it here, saying, hey, we can get the same result by inculcating or activating some primitive religious quadrant of human psychology, and we can get that same result. So it's still happening today. To prove that point, under AFF and CAN, armies of kidnappers were sent out into the field to profile both the distraught parents and the cult recruits. Excuse me. Operating under what one longtime deprogrammer characterized as a license to kidnap from witting local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, these kidnapping teams operated with impunity from coast to coast throughout much of the 80s. Given this new phase of the covert mind control war, a certain degree of operational control apparently was shifted from the CIA to the FBI. The FBI's training academy at Quantico, Virginia, established a full-time staff of behavioral scientists. Remembering that FBI is largely was shaped, or its development was guided. It was developed under the watchful eye of Tavistock, but it's also a project of the House of Bonaparte as well. So. And at the nearby University of Virginia, an Institute of Law, Psychiatry, and Public Policy began receiving funds of the Criminal Justice Institute to set up as a reservoir of professional forensic psychiatric personnel many veterans of the MK Ultra wars. See article page 64 for the story of how this institute figures in an attempt to subject Michael Billington, an associate of Lyndon LaRouche, great researcher, who is currently on trial in Virginia as a political dissident. Yeah, imagine that. To Soviet-style psychiatric abuses. Up until last year, Dr. Park Elliott Dietz, formerly of MK Ultra-linked McLean Hospital and the Bridgewater State Institution for the Criminally Insane in Massachusetts, was the chief guru at the institute. Dietz was apparently a liaison between the FBI and the CAN and the AFF. In at least one instance, CAN-sponsored kidnapper deprogrammer Ken Connor was deployed through Dietz, probably Americans will say Dietz, in an arm's-length operation run for Quantico. Part 2, which we will read, we'll take up the question of why the American Family Foundation really hates LaRouche and how it has deployed against his political movement. Well, I think it's pretty clear. I think we can pretty much answer that in our own minds, but it's a fascinating, part 2 is fascinating. We'll get into that next time. Thank you, guys.